Get out of my seat, you nobody! The voice sliced through the polished air of first class. Olivia Whitfield's red, painted nails dug into the worn hoodie on Daniel Carter's shoulder, yanking him upright. Hot coffee splashed, staining the Wall Street Journal and soaking into his faded jeans. Olivia swept in like a conqueror claiming territory, dropping into seat 1A, crossing her legs, adjusting her Chanel dress, and resting her hand on the soft leather armrest. The cabin lights glinted off the diamonds at her wrist, sparkling like a punctuation mark of arrogance. The entire cabin froze, wide eyes, sharp intakes of breath. Somewhere, a phone camera clicked on. An ordinary moment had just become a theater piece for an unwilling audience. Daniel stood motionless in the aisle. Tall, broad-shouldered, yet his modest clothes made him look out of place among the rows of expensive suits. In his hand, a crumpled boarding pass still bore the number 1A, smudged with coffee but unmistakable. He gripped its edge, his chest rising not from shame, but from the heavy weight of injustice made visible. Olivia's voice cut again, sharp as a knife. That's better. First class isn't for strays in flea market clothes. Whispers spread through the cabin. A teenager lifted a phone to TikTok Live, eyes gleaming at the scent of drama. "This is real," he murmured. Daniel stayed silent. No outburst, no protest. He simply stood, his gaze fixed in the air, swallowing the stares of the cabin whole. To some, it looked like defeat, but within him, his heartbeat was steady, calm, like a man watching a chess match he had already set in motion. The click of hurried heels broke the silence. Sarah Miller, the blonde lead attendant, appeared. Her face was tight with worry, but when her eyes landed on Olivia and Daniel, worry turned to choice. She leaned down, her voice dripping with saccharine courtesy. "Ma'am, are you all right? My apologies for this disruption." Daniel held up his ticket. "This is my seat, 1A." Sarah glanced at the smudged paper, barely looking. Her eyes flicked down to his worn shoes, his faded backpack, then back up with a stiff smile. "Sir, there must be some mistake. Economy is further back." The words landed like a hammer. Olivia smirked, folding her arms, settling deeper into the seat as if crowned the rightful owner. Daniel drew in a slow breath. Memories surged. Years of quiet refusals, suspicious glances, cutting remarks dressed in politeness. But he was no longer the powerless young man he once had been. He now held in his hands a power no one in this cabin could imagine. Around him, the murmurs grew. Why won't they check his ticket? It clearly says the seat, but no one stepped forward. They chose instead to film, to watch, to keep safe distance. Daniel swept the cabin with his eyes. 200 stares, dozens of phones recording every twitch and breath. He knew every second mattered. Every silence, every denial, all of it would stand as evidence. Sarah stepped closer, shielding Olivia. "Sir, please don't cause trouble. I'm sure your real seat will be comfortable." Daniel's reply was quiet, low, but clear. "My real seat is right here." The air thickened. An older passenger spoke up. "Why not check his ticket properly?" Sarah's face hardened. "Sir, please don't interfere. I have this under control." Olivia laughed, her nails tapping the leather armrest like claws. "Look around. Look at us. Then look at him. Who really belongs in first class? A chill fire rose inside Daniel's chest. Not hot rage, but the cold certainty of a man who knows the board is set for checkmate. He let the insults pile, let the stares weigh heavy, just as pieces gather on one side before the final move. The overhead chime sounded. Cabin doors closing in 10 minutes. Passengers, please take your seats. Sarah pressed the call button. David, I need support. Passenger occupying a seat and causing disruption. Daniel's lips curved ever so slightly. He knew with a few more pieces in place, this play would reach its peak. And when it did, no one here would believe that the man they had scorned was the one holding the power to decide the fate of the entire flight. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed from the front of the cabin. David Torres, the 41-year-old purser, approached with the stern air of someone convinced he held absolute authority over the flight. His eyes swept across the cabin and landed on Daniel Carter, a middle-aged man in a faded hoodie and worn shoes. Judgment had already been passed before David even spoke. What seems to be the problem here? His voice was loud, meant for every passenger to hear. Sarah quickly stepped in, pointing toward Daniel as if identifying the culprit. He refuses to leave the seat, insists it's his. We're about to miss departure. David nodded without even glancing at the ticket in Daniel's hand. That nod was a verdict. He turned to Olivia Whitfield, still lounging in seat 1A, and spoke with reverence. My apologies for the inconvenience, ma'am. We'll take care of this immediately. Olivia smiled, her diamond-studded finger tapping the armrest like a conductor waiting for the orchestra to resume. Daniel remained calm, his voice low but steady. This is my seat. The ticket clearly says 1A. Please check it. David gave the paper a dismissive glance and scoffed. I don't have time for counterfeit documents. If you don't move, we'll call security. A murmur spread through the cabin like a ripple on water. Passengers raised their phones higher, some already live streaming. Amy Chen, the teenage girl a few rows back, whispered into her phone. They didn't even bother to check his ticket. This is discrimination happening right in front of us. The drama had spilled beyond the cabin, into the digital world, where thousands of eyes were now watching every gesture. Daniel tightened his grip on the strap of his backpack, but his gaze remained calm. No resistance, no anger. His composure seemed to irritate Olivia more than defiance. She sneered. Didn't you hear? When they tell you to move, you move. Or do you want to try handcuffs? David nodded to Sarah, who pressed the call button. Within minutes, 2 more attendants appeared. James Lee, 25, young and brash, and Michelle Rodriguez, 39, seasoned, but her expression marked with doubt. The 3 of them formed a half circle around Daniel. It was unmistakably a trap. Sir, Michelle said, her voice sharp, we need your cooperation. If not, airport security will come aboard and take you out in handcuffs. The mention of handcuffs set the cabin buzzing. An older passenger shook his head in disapproval but stayed silent. Others whispered, caught between outrage and curiosity. Daniel raised his eyes, scanning the sea of phones pointed at him. In that silence, something like a spark flashed. He knew that with every delay, with every baseless threat, they were building the evidence against themselves. He doesn't even look like first class, James muttered with a smirk, loud enough for others to hear. Probably bought the ticket at an outlet. Olivia laughed, turning toward the recording passengers. "You see this? I've flown this route for 15 years. Platinum diamond. Everything. People like me deserve this seat. And him? Clearly an imposter." Sarah nodded, adding, "We deeply value loyal customers like Mrs. Whitfield. Thank you for your patience." Daniel heard it all, each clipped word cutting at his dignity. But instead of breaking, his lips curved in the faintest hint of a smile. "All right then," he said quietly, his tone unnervingly calm. "Go ahead." David hesitated for a fraction of a second. He was used to pleas, to anger, to resistance. But Daniel did none of these. He simply stood there, eyes steady, as though he were waiting. The discomfort crept into the crew. Michelle's hands clenched. James ground his teeth. Olivia laughed louder, convinced her opponent was finished. Only one person in the cabin sensed something different. Amy. She whispered into her live stream. "He's not afraid. It's like he already knows he's going to win." The camera trembled as she swallowed hard. The viewer count surged from chapter 3,000 to over 10,000. Comments poured across the screen. "They're openly discriminating." "Just check the ticket. Why guess?" "Call the press right now." The cabin intercom crackled. 6 minutes to departure. Crew. Complete final checks." David hissed, his voice low but sharp. "Do you hear that? 6 minutes. You're delaying 200 passengers just because you won't leave the seat. This is my last warning." Daniel lifted his head. His voice was calm, each word deliberate. "I'm sitting in the seat I paid for, and the truth will speak for itself." A hush fell. Then, as if on cue, Daniel's phone lit up in his hand. He swiped the screen, and the airline's logo flared bright. No one in that cabin yet realized that within minutes, the man cornered and humiliated would turn the entire game into a storm that would shake the world. Daniel's phone screen glowed, the airline's logo casting light across his calm face. He opened the app, his fingers moving swiftly, practiced, deliberate. To the crew encircling him, the sight only fueled their suspicion. "What's he doing?" Sarah whispered, her brows knitted. David smirked with disdain. "Probably calling in a complaint. They always do." James stood planted behind Daniel, shoulders tight as if ready to drag him out at any second. Michelle folded her arms, her eyes narrowing, her voice sharp. "You should stop this now. Security is on the way." Daniel didn't look up. His fingers tapped the screen in steady rhythm, like a drumbeat echoing through the cabin. A rhythm only he understood, a rhythm that meant the waiting was almost over. Olivia reclined in the seat with smug delight. Ridiculous. He thinks a phone call will change anything? People like that never belong here. Her words cut through the silence. A man in 2C snapped his laptop shut, his voice controlled but sharp. "Excuse me, but at least check his ticket. I've seen him show it more than once." David spun around, his voice harsh. "Sir, please do not interfere. We're handling this according to procedure." The man raised an eyebrow, answering coolly. "What kind of procedure doesn't include looking at a valid document?" The question cracked open the cabin like a whip. Sarah flushed red, stammering. We don't need to see obvious forgeries." An elderly woman in 1B spoke, her voice trembling but firm. How do you know it's forged if you won't even look? The murmurs rose, sparks catching dry grass, yet the crew clung to their control. Michelle's voice cut like steel. We're trained to recognize who doesn't belong in first class. That's experience, not paperwork. The words landed like a slap. Amy Chen, still live streaming, whispered straight into her phone. Did you hear that? They just admitted it. Appearance decides your seat. Viewers surged from 15,000 to 25,000 in seconds. Comments scrolled in waves. Take them to court. Blatant discrimination. Check the ticket now. Daniel stayed silent, his eyes flicking to Olivia, basking in her false victory, then settling on Sarah. His voice was calm, quiet, but unyielding. You refuse to look at the ticket. You refuse to look at the truth. But I don't need to beg. Just wait a few minutes, and you won't dare look me in the eye. Olivia laughed mockingly. Do you hear yourself? You sound like you're in some science fiction movie. Her laughter died as two security officers stepped into the cabin. Officer Williams, a tall black man in his 40s with a steady presence, and Officer Carter, an Asian woman with sharp eyes and calm authority. Williams spoke first, his tone professional. What's going on here? David rushed forward, playing the victim. This passenger refuses to leave the seat, insists it's his, even though the evidence is clear it isn't. He's causing a disturbance, delaying the flight. Officer Carter tilted her head, her gaze piercing. What evidence, exactly? Sarah froze. Michelle faltered. James glanced toward Olivia. Olivia jumped in, her voice loud and assertive. I bought this seat. I've been loyal to this airline for 15 years. And him? She jabbed a finger at Daniel. He's just pretending. Williams extended his hand. Your ticket, sir. Daniel slowly handed over the crumpled paper. Carter took it, her eyes scanning, then pausing. She read aloud, each word clear, ringing like a bell. Seat 1A. The cabin erupted in gasps and whispers. Olivia shot up from the seat, frantic. No, that must be fake. Look at him. Does he look like he belongs in first class? David nodded quickly, echoing her. Of course it's forged. It's obvious to anyone. Williams fixed his gaze on David, his eyes cold. Sir, I need concrete evidence, not judgments based on appearances. The air turned thick. Olivia clutched the armrest, breathing hard. Sarah bowed her head, sweat dripping onto her collar. James glanced around, his smirk vanishing. Michelle bit her lip, trying to hold her stance, but her eyes betrayed her doubt. Daniel nodded slightly. He knew the moment had shifted. His finger slid across his phone screen, the glow intensifying, unlocking a world the cabin had never seen, where the truth could no longer be denied. The glow from Daniel's phone lit the cabin, casting its light across tense faces. There was Olivia's arrogance, Sarah's unease, David's anger, and the wary curiosity of every passenger. His fingers moved quickly, peeling back layers of the airline's app. It was no longer the familiar booking screen. Internal data, admin dashboards, high-level authentication codes appeared one after another. Then a line blazed across the silence like a blade. Daniel Carter, Chief Executive Officer, ID 020. Full access granted. Officer Carter's mouth fell open, as she read the words aloud. The cabin froze. For a few heartbeats, the only sound was the hum of engines outside. David, the man who had just invoked procedure, went pale. His words stuttered. Broken. This can't be. Sarah craned her neck, and when her eyes landed on the word CEO, all color drained from her face. She staggered back half a step, hands trembling. Oh God, James and Michelle leaned closer, and in an instant the arrogance and confidence they had carried collapsed like sandcastles struck by waves. James whispered, "No, it can't be. It's really him." Michelle, who had threatened to cuff Daniel moments earlier, stood speechless, her eyes clouding. Olivia still hadn't grasped the nightmare descending upon her. Arms crossed, she clung to her defiance. "This is a trick, a fake app. Don't let him fool you." Daniel turned the screen toward her. Olivia's eyes flicked to the number, 43,000 employees reporting directly, and to the glowing digital signature of the board of directors. The blood drained from her face. The diamond bracelet on her wrist shook uncontrollably. His voice came low and steady, heavy as a hammer. "I don't just own Seat 1A. I own every seat on this flight. And more than that, I own this airline." The cabin erupted. Breaths quickened, whispers ricocheted across the rows. Phones shook as passengers tried to record with unsteady hands. Amy Chen's live stream exploded, the counter soaring past 50,000, then 70,000 live viewers. Comments flooded in. "That's the real CEO." They insulted the top boss himself. "This is history." Daniel turned to Officer Williams, his tone calm but commanding. "Now you understand why I refused to leave my seat." Williams nodded, his eyes shifting from sternness to respect. "Completely, Mr. Carter." David collapsed into the nearest seat, his face ghost white, sweat pouring. He stammered. We were just following protocol." Daniel cut in, his words like sharpened steel. "What protocol allows you to judge a customer by skin color, by their shoes, by a hoodie? What protocol lets you ignore evidence, ignore a boarding pass, and threaten a passenger with jail?" Sarah broke down, tears streaming. "I'm sorry, I didn't know. I was wrong." "Not wrong," Daniel corrected, his voice steady but cutting. "A chain of failures. Prejudice so deep it convinced you it was acceptable to humiliate someone in front of hundreds of witnesses." Olivia, once the most arrogant presence in the cabin, now sat hollow-eyed. She whispered, disbelieving her own words. You're really the CEO?" Daniel met her gaze. No sarcasm, no restraint, only quiet authority. "I am the CEO. I own 67% of this airline. And I am the man you shoved aside, the one you declared unworthy of sitting in first class." The murmurs turned into scattered claps, then swelled into thunderous applause. Passengers had just witnessed a reversal for the ages, from the man dismissed as an imposter to the undeniable owner of the skies. Daniel drew a deep breath, his eyes sweeping over the crew, settling on David. "Now explain this. How will you write your report? That you threatened to cuff the airline's CEO?" David broke into sobs. James dropped his gaze. Michelle trembled. Sarah hid her face, her body folding in defeat. Olivia clutched the armrest, her eyes vacant. For the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to be in the wrong seat, not just 1A, but in the story itself. Daniel didn't need to shout. He didn't need anger. His composure was the sharpest blade, slicing through every prejudice in that cabin. And this was only the beginning. The echoes of scattered applause still lingered in first class, but as Daniel Carter sat tall, his piercing gaze sweeping across the crew, the mood shifted from excitement to suffocating tension. David Torres remained slumped in his seat, face drained of all color, clutching the clipboard that had fallen to the floor as if it could salvage a career reduced to ashes. Sarah Miller trembled, wiping away tears but not daring to lift her head. James Lee bit his lip, his throat dry. Michelle Rodriguez, once the most outspoken, could only avert her eyes. Olivia Whitfield, who had seized seat 1A, now shrank in on herself like a deflated balloon. Her manicured red nails dug into her own skin until they tore, trembling uncontrollably. Daniel drew in a slow breath, his voice resonating across the cabin. You turned a passenger into a criminal. You ignored evidence, choosing instead to trust your prejudice. And worst of all, you did this to the chief executive officer of your own airline. The cabin fell silent. 200 passengers held their breath. Dozens of phones kept recording, their tiny red lights burning like 1,000 unblinking eyes of judgment. Daniel pulled out his phone and opened his contacts. A list appeared. Legal department, HR emergency, media relations, board chair. His finger stopped on legal department. He pressed call. The speakerphone carried every word. Carter Airways Legal Department, this is Patricia Hendris. Patricia, Daniel said, his voice even and cold. I'm on flight 447. Prepare to file a discrimination lawsuit. 4 crew members and 1 passenger involved. All evidence is being recorded and live. Dreamed. The cabin shook with the weight of his words. Sarah burst into sobs. James whispered hoarsely, Dear God, live stream. Amy Chen, the teenage passenger in the back, still filming, spoke softly to her audience. He just called his lawyers. This is all happening live. Patricia's voice on the other end was crisp. Yes, sir. I'll assemble the team within the hour. Do you want us to notify federal authorities immediately? Yes. The FAA and the Department of Transportation. I want them to see this firsthand. Daniel ended the call and dialed again. HR emergency line. Janet Mills, Director of Human Resources, speaking. Janet, take this down. Sarah Miller. 6-month suspension without pay. Mandatory retraining and psychological evaluation before reinstatement. James Lee. 1 year probation with strict oversight. Michelle Rodriguez. Demotion, 15% pay cut for 2 years, 100 hours of bias training. David Torres, terminated immediately, no severance, barred from re-employment in the airline industry. The sound of typing rattled through the speaker. Janet's voice came back, steady and clear. Noted, sir. David broke down, tears streaming, hands clasped together in desperate pleading. Please, sir, I have a family, children. I was only following routine. Please, one more chance. Daniel looked at him, eyes a mix of pity and resolve. You've had 8 years here. 8 years of training. 8 years to learn fairness. You did not change. Today, I change it for you." David collapsed to the floor, his sobs ragged. Sarah dropped to her knees, choking out, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean. I thought." Daniel cut her off, his tone like ice. "You thought skin color determined who deserved which seat. That is not a mistake, that is prejudice." Michelle stiffened, trying to mask her emotions, but her reddened eyes betrayed her. James stood frozen, his hands trembling. Daniel slipped his phone away and turned to Officer Williams and Officer Carter, the two security officers who had stood silently as witnesses. "Officers, document everything. This will be critical evidence for the federal investigation." Williams nodded, his voice low and heavy. "We will record every detail, sir." His words fell like a hammer, sealing the crew's fate. Then Daniel turned to Olivia. She quivered, lips cracked, voice dry and broken. I didn't know. If I had known you were the CEO." Daniel cut her short, his voice steady and sharp. "And if I were just another passenger, if I were not CEO, you would have gone on humiliating me, pushing me back to economy. The truth is, you believe power rests in skin color and clothing. But real power lies in truth and justice." Olivia lowered her head, tears cutting through smeared lipstick. Daniel faced the passengers, his voice carrying, strong and unwavering. "Today, you did not just witness a seat dispute. You saw discrimination laid bare. And here, now, in this cabin, it ends." Applause broke out. First scattered, then rising, rolling through the cabin like thunder. Cameras shook. The live stream counter surged past 100,000 viewers. Daniel drew in a deep breath, his eyes glowing like forged steel. He knew this moment was not just about a handful of people. It would shape a new era for the entire airline industry. The applause in the cabin slowly faded. Every eye remained fixed on Daniel Carter, as if awaiting the next verdict. But this time, he was not speaking only to the crew, not only to Olivia. He was speaking to the entire system, and to the world watching through hundreds of live streaming phones. Daniel unlocked his phone and scrolled to the contact. HR emergency. Janet Mills was still standing by. "Janet," his voice rang steady and precise. "Note this down. Starting tomorrow, every member of Carter Airways cabin crew must wear a body camera. Every complaint of discrimination must be processed within 24 hours by the Bias Response Board. I want an initial budget of $50 million annually for the next 3 years." The sound of frantic typing echoed through the speaker. Janet's voice came back, almost choking. "Yes, sir. I will implement immediately." A wave spread through the cabin. Passengers sat stunned, unable to believe they had just witnessed the birth of an international policy in mid-air. Daniel did not stop. He pressed another contact. Media Relations. Michael Carter. "Michael, I need a press conference at 6 p.m. today. The theme, full transparency. No cover, UU-ups, no softening. We will admit our mistakes and announce the reforms. If the board objects, remind them I hold 67% of the shares." There was silence for a moment, then Michael's voice trembling with emotion. "Understood, sir. I'll prepare everything." Murmurs filled the cabin again. A businessman in seat 2C shook his head in awe and whispered, "We are witnessing history. What began as a seat dispute has become a revolution. Sarah Miller, her eyes swollen red, spoke in a faint voice. "Sir, is there any way for us to make this right?" Daniel turned to her, his gaze stern, but not entirely cold. "You want redemption? Good. You will become an instructor in the bias training program. You will tell exactly how you ignored the evidence, how you chose to see skin color instead of a boarding pass. Real lessons carry weight only when they come from those who made the mistake." Sarah sobbed, nodding again and again. Some passengers murmured in agreement, a few clapping softly. Daniel's eyes swept the cabin, his voice rising deeper, steady as steel. "Power does not lie in skin color, nor in diamonds, nor in a tailored suit. Power is in the ability to correct mistakes, and I will use that power to ensure no passenger ever suffers the humiliation I endured today." Amy Chen's live stream counter surged past 150,000 viewers. Comments exploded. "This is the CEO the world needs. Not just for airlines, but for society itself." Every word burns prejudice to ashes. Daniel continued, his tone slow but razor-sharp. "I am ordering the creation of a passenger advocate position at every hub. That person will report directly to me. Any discriminatory behavior will be reported instantly. Beginning next quarter, every frontline employee must pass a quarterly bias evaluation. Fail once, retraining. Fail twice, unpaid suspension. Fail 3 times, termination and permanent industry blacklist." Applause erupted from the rear of the cabin. Passengers who had remained silent now burst with emotion, as if their long, suppressed grievances were finally being spoken aloud. Officer Williams, still holding his notebook, looked up and nodded. "Sir, I've seen discrimination countless times, but never have I seen someone at the peak of power choose reform over revenge." Daniel's gaze cut through him. "Revenge only breeds more hate. Education creates lasting change." Olivia Whitfield shrank into seat 1A, the seat that was never hers. Tears streaked her expensive makeup. She whispered hoarsely, I'll do anything to make amends." Daniel looked directly at her, his voice heavy as a tolling bell. "You will have your chance. But that chance will not come from hiding. It will come from transparency, from standing before millions and admitting it was you who were wrong." The cabin fell into dead silence. Daniel inhaled deeply and glanced at his watch. 15 minutes until takeoff. He knew from this moment forward, the sky was no longer just the sky. It had become a courtroom, and this flight had become the first chapter of a new era. The first-class cabin was frozen in silence. The only sound came from the faint murmur of Amy Chen's live stream, where over 200,000 people were hanging on every breath. Every eye was fixed on one person, Olivia Whitfield, the woman who had ripped away seat 1A with her lacquered red nails, now sat crumpled in that very seat, her face smeared with makeup and tears. Daniel Carter stood before her, his figure towering like a judge in a courtroom. But this was not merely the court of an airline. It was the court of public opinion, of justice, of history itself. His voice rang deep and steady, each word striking like a hammer. "Mrs. Whitfield, you did not just insult a passenger. You humiliated the CEO of the very airline you are flying on. But more importantly, you exposed the true face of prejudice, the belief that a diamond bracelet decides the worth of a human being. Olivia choked back sobs, her hands trembling. I didn't know. If I had known you were the CEO, Daniel cut her off, his tone sharp as a blade. And if I had been just an ordinary passenger, would you have left me standing here like a thief in front of this cabin? Would you have let the live stream broadcast my humiliation? Olivia dropped her gaze. Her silence carried the answer. Daniel raised his phone, the screen lighting up with Olivia's LinkedIn profile. Senior Marketing Director at Coca-Cola, Chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. The words glared back like scars cut into the air. Passengers gasped. You are the one who writes slogans about equality. You are the one who stands on stages urging corporations to eliminate bias. Yet today you told me you don't belong in this seat. Olivia broke down, lipstick smeared across her cheek. I lost control. I'm not that kind of person. Daniel's gaze drilled into her, stern yet piercing. The truth of who we are is revealed in the moments we think no one is watching. But today, hundreds are watching, and hundreds of thousands more are watching live. You cannot deny it. He drew a breath, his voice dropping low, but cutting like ice. You have two choices. The entire cabin leaned forward. Amy's phone quivered in her hand, the counter leaping to 250,000 viewers. Daniel lifted 2 fingers. 1. You apologize publicly. That apology will be recorded and spread across every social platform. You will complete 200 hours of community service with civil rights organizations, 6 months of counseling on bias, and for the rest of your life, every flight you take will carry a flagged record. He paused, his voice heavy as stone. Or 2. I send today's footage to the CEO of Coca-Cola, to the Department of Justice, to the press. You will face federal charges, a lifetime flight ban, the collapse of your career and reputation overnight. The cabin held its breath. Olivia trembled, lips quivering. A few passengers shook their heads. Some whispered, "The choice is clear." Amy clutched her phone, whispering to her audience. He's giving her 2 paths, and we're about to see which one she takes. Olivia inhaled sharply, her shoulders shaking. She lifted her head, face streaked and desperate. I choose to apologize. Daniel nodded, his voice firm and commanding. Say it loudly. The whole world must hear. Olivia rose on unsteady heels, her body swaying. She looked around the cabin, then directly into Amy's camera. Tears streamed down her face as her hoarse voice rang out. I, Olivia Whitfield, apologize. I was wrong to judge and humiliate someone based on appearance. I accept any punishment, any re-education required, and I promise to change. The cabin erupted in applause, not out of pity, but because justice was being carried out. Daniel nodded, his gaze softened with a trace of mercy. An apology is a beginning, but true change is salvation. Remember that, Mrs. Whitfield. Olivia collapsed into her seat, as if the weight of her guilt had finally crushed her. Daniel turned to Officer Williams, his voice carrying across the cabin. Record this. Olivia Whitfield has chosen the path of accountability. From this moment on, she will stand as a living testament to reform, not its casualty. Williams nodded, quickly noting it down. The cabin exhaled in unison. But in Daniel's eyes, everyone understood. The verdict for one individual had been delivered, but the revolution for the entire system had only just begun. The thunderous applause in the first-class cabin had barely faded when Daniel Carter rose to his full height, his eyes sweeping across the cabin. No longer the man in the faded hoodie, he now stood as the image of a leader shaping the future. He raised his phone and dialed his next contact, Michael Carter, Director of Communications. The speakerphone clicked on, and the entire cabin could hear. "Michael," Daniel said firmly, "prepare a press conference for 6 o'clock this evening. The theme, complete transparency. No softening, no excuses. The full truth will be made public." "But, sir," Michael hesitated, "the stock could plunge. The media will tear apart every detail. We should control the narrative." Daniel cut him off, his voice sharp as steel. "We will not control. We will confront. Transparency builds trust. Cover-ups kill companies. The message must reach every employee, every customer, every shareholder. Carter Airways will not tolerate discrimination, even when the person disrespected is the CEO himself." There was a moment of silence before Michael answered with resolve. "Understood, sir. I'll mobilize the entire communications team." Daniel ended the call and lifted his gaze. He looked directly into Amy Chen's camera, the teenager now broadcasting to over 300,000 live viewers. His voice rang clear, steady, and powerful. "Ladies and gentlemen watching, today you are not just witnessing a dispute over a seat. You are seeing the true face of prejudice, something that has quietly existed across every service industry. But right here, on this flight, we are starting a revolution." The cabin fell utterly silent. Passengers held their breath, as though they too were witnesses in a courtroom of history. Daniel continued, his voice slow, each word deliberate. "Carter Airways will become the first airline to enact the Dignity Decree. Every passenger, regardless of skin color, clothing, or wallet, has the right to absolute respect. There will be no more space for bias. No more silence in the face of injustice." Applause erupted again. Louder this time, united and unstoppable. Some passengers wept openly, as though finding justice for the silent wounds they had carried for years. Officer Williams, who had seen hundreds of acts of bias throughout his career, nodded slowly, his voice low and moved. "Mr. Carter, today you haven't just changed one airline. You've changed the way this entire industry looks at its passengers." Daniel met his eyes, his own burning bright. "Exactly. And I will not stop here. Within 48 hours, I want to see every major airline issue the same commitment. If they refuse, I will make them change by turning this incident into the new standard for the entire industry." Amy whispered into her phone, her voice trembling with excitement. "Do you hear that? He's not just reforming his own airline, he's forcing the entire industry to follow. This is history right now." The live stream counter soared. 350,000, 400,000. Comments flooded in like a torrent. "I'll only fly Carter Airways from now on. This is the CEO the world needs." No more silence. Daniel drew a deep breath, his eyes turning to the airplane window. The sky stretched vast and endless beyond the glass. His voice dropped, heavy and resonant. carrying beyond the cabin to the world outside. The sky does not discriminate. Neither will the seats on this plane. If we can change one flight, we can change an entire industry. And if we can change an industry, we can change society. Applause broke out once more, no longer spontaneous but unanimous, a silent oath. Olivia Whitfield still sat trembling, her face ashen. But she was no longer the focus. Daniel had transformed her from the symbol of prejudice into a living lesson, and now the story had expanded beyond her, beyond the cabin, to become the emblem of a global reform. Daniel sat back down, for the first time in nearly an hour of unrelenting confrontation. He placed his phone on the table, but his eyes still blazed, the fire within him far from fading. And across the world, hundreds of thousands had just witnessed the moment when a single seat on an airplane became a podium for justice. The applause in the cabin slowly faded, but its aftershocks had already surged beyond the airplane itself. Phones streaming live had turned this moment into a tidal wave sweeping across the digital world. On Amy Chen's screen, the number of viewers kept climbing. 450,000, 500,000, 600,000 watching live. On Twitter, the hashtags #Carter, Airways, and #Dignity first shot to the top of global trends within minutes. News outlets scrambled for headlines. Airline CEO thrown out of seat 1A on his own flight, then turns the tables. Historic moment. CEO exposes discrimination at 40,000 feet. Inside the cabin, passengers buzzed with excitement. Some whispered to loved ones over the phone. Others refreshed social media non-stop. A businessman in seat 2C snapped his laptop open, eyes wide. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, they're all streaming this live. We're witnesses to history. Daniel Carter sat tall, not missing a beat. He dialed the board chair. On the other end, the chairman's voice quivered. Daniel, the whole world is watching. Are you sure you want to keep going public like this? The stock could crash. Daniel's reply was firm, unwavering. The stock might lose a few points today, but if we choose transparency, tomorrow it will double. Because trust is not priced in numbers, it's built by the courage to face mistakes. There was silence, then a heavy sigh. All right, we stand behind you. Daniel ended the call, lifted his gaze and met Amy's eyes. The teenager still held her phone steady, hands trembling with excitement. He gave a faint smile, then turned fully toward her camera. Remember this. Every one of us has the right to say enough. Today I said it for myself, but also for millions out there who have been pushed out of their own seat 1A in life. That seat could be a job opportunity, a scholarship, or simply the right to be treated with dignity. From today, we will not be silent. The cabin erupted in applause. An elderly woman in the middle rows clutched her husband's hand, tears streaming down her face. Do you hear that? Finally, someone is speaking for us. The live stream exploded with comments. I lost my job once just because of how I looked. He's right. Seat 1A is a symbol of fairness. I'll tell my children this story, so they know hope still exists. Outside the aircraft, the domino effect began. United Airlines issued a breaking statement. We are reviewing all service protocols. American Airlines quickly followed. We pledge to announce an anti-bias program within 48 hours. Inside the cabin, a passenger whispered in awe. He only spoke a few sentences, and the whole industry is trembling. Daniel's phone buzzed with a new alert. NASDAQ, Carter Airways, plus 3.2% after transparency pledge. Gasps spread through the cabin as he held up the screen for all to see. The market had already responded. Trust, once ignited, was stronger than any storm of rumors. Sarah Miller, the very woman who had once stood in front of Daniel like a shield of pride, now approached him, eyes swollen red. Mr. Carter, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want to help. I want to turn my mistake into a lesson for my colleagues. Please, give me the chance to train others about bias. Daniel looked at her, his gaze stern but not without compassion. Opportunity is not for erasing mistakes, it's for atonement. I'll give you 6 months to prove you're worthy. Sarah nodded through tears, this time tears of gratitude. Olivia Whitfield still shrank into seat 1A, eyes haunted. But Daniel no longer looked at her. He had already turned her into the past, a vivid example, but only one piece of a far greater picture: reform. His voice rose once again, echoing through the cabin, carried far beyond by hundreds of live streams. Tomorrow, when you open the news, when the world talks about Flight 447, I want them to remember one thing. This is not just a story about a seat. It is a story about how we choose to treat one another. And from this moment on, respect will no longer be a privilege. It will be the standard. The cabin thundered with applause, mingled with woos and sighs of release. The sky outside remained vast and blue, but within the hearts of the passengers, a new era had just begun. The applause still echoed like the aftershocks of a storm. Yet as the cabin gradually settled, every eye remained fixed on Daniel Carter. The man in the worn hoodie had become a living symbol of justice. He rose, stepping slowly into the aisle. His voice rang steady, deep, and powerful, carrying through every heart without the need for a microphone. Today, you witnessed the truth. A seat, once nothing more than a number printed on a ticket, has become a symbol of human dignity. Seat 1A is not mine alone. It belongs to everyone who has ever been pushed to the back simply because of prejudice. The cabin fell silent. Many passengers bowed their heads, tears slipping quietly down their faces. Daniel bent down, lifted his small suitcase from the overhead bin, and placed it neatly on seat 1A, the very seat at the center of humiliation and reversal. He did not sit. He stood tall, his eyes sweeping across the cabin. This seat will no longer be the throne of privilege. From this day forward, 1A will represent the dignity protocol. Whoever sits here, no matter who they are, will be reminded that respect is not a reward. It is a duty. Applause erupted again, this time crashing like waves. Phones trembled in hands. Amy Chen's live stream surged to 650,000 viewers, then 700,000. Comments poured in. I have goosebumps. This is history. Seat 1A will be in business textbooks. From today, I'll teach my children that dignity is never negotiable. Daniel turned to the crew, the very people who had fallen from pride to disgrace. Sarah, James, Michelle, David, each stripped of their masks. His voice rang heavy, yet not without a trace of humanity. You failed. but you will become the reminder for generations to come. So that every time someone thinks about judging a passenger with a glance, they will remember this flight. Sarah buried her face and sobbed. James trembled and nodded. Michelle swallowed hard, while David still sat on the floor, eyes hollow, his career collapsing in front of hundreds of thousands of witnesses. Daniel drew a deep breath, his tone lowering, solemn and steady. I do not seek revenge. I seek change. If your mistakes can become the fuel for reform, then this flight will not have been in vain. The entire cabin held its breath. An elderly passenger rose, his voice trembling. Mr. Carter, thank you. You did not only defend justice for yourself, you saved it for all of us, those who stayed silent out of fear. A thunder of applause burst forth, no longer scattered, no longer hesitant. The entire cabin rose together, clapping like a storm, the sound reverberating off the fuselage like a triumphant anthem. Daniel nodded softly. Then at last, he sat down in seat 1A. No more disputes, no more disdain, only acknowledgement. The man once cast aside now sat in the place that belonged to him, not because of shares or titles, but because he had turned that seat into a symbol of fairness. Amy Chen, still streaming live, whispered with a trembling voice, "Everyone, we have just witnessed a revolution in the sky." Outside, the sky stretched vast and blue. The pilot announced preparations for takeoff. Engines roared, shaking the aircraft. But within the hearts of those aboard Flight 447, one truth was certain. They were not only leaving the ground, they were taking off with a new era. Daniel leaned back against the seat, eyes closing. Yet he knew when they opened again, the whole world would be waiting for his next step. And he was ready. Flight 447 was no longer just a journey from point A to point B. It became a public tribunal where justice did not wear a black robe, but a faded hoodie. It turned seat 1A into a symbol of dignity, something that should belong to everyone, not a privilege for the few. From the moment Daniel Carter stood, the silence of hundreds of passengers was replaced by applause, and the world understood this truth. Fairness does not need an invitation, nor does it need to be granted. It is a default right, the natural breath of every human being. But the question that remains, the question for all of us, is this: when faced with injustice, will we stay silent and turn away, or will we rise and say, enough? If you believe that dignity is never negotiable, leave a comment with 3 words: dignity first. And do not forget to like and subscribe to follow the next stories where justice is not just an idea, but a choice we can make every single day.